Hey. Welcome to episode 121 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Ratnos, joined by Trell
Howdy.
and Tuttles.
Yo, what up?
Yo. This week, we have a main topic that I actually think is going to be pretty interesting, and we're going to do a similar version of it next week. Interesting, for a change for us. So this week, we're going to talk about the Sepulcher of the first ones, raid meta class speculation. So what sort of stuff's going to be good, how good it will be, how important it will be for normal guilds to conform versus not conform, because, some tiers you'll feel it more than others if you're playing with some off-meta stuff. So should hopefully be a pretty interesting look. Of course, obviously, we're all frequently wrong about these things before tiers, but, we try our best and try and have a better than random idea of what's going to look good. And then next week we'll try and do it for M Plus as well if it works well. So stay tuned for that. Let us know if you'd be interested in that.
I think the M Plus one is going to be a lot easier to do than the raid one. I think that we are jumping into deep water with this raid one first.
Yeah, so I've done all the raid testing. I've played a lot of different specs, and not that many, but I've paid a lot of attention to the others. And I think I played 4 or 5 specs. But yeah, there's so many variables about the raid. Just to name a couple, just to spoil a couple, there's the fact the last 3 bosses, we don't know how they work yet. We don't know what's going to be important on those fights. We don't know if the double legendary timing is going to make it to live as is, but if it does, that's hugely important, and it's also extremely dependent on that variable of how hard the raid is. And then, we also have to take into account that every single class is gaining a Covenant Legendary, so that's just so many moving parts coming into this.
Bug fixes, other potential tuning,
Yes.
So there's also the aspect that the last 3 bosses are going to determine what is played on the 8 preceding bosses. Like, once people know what to expect on those bosses, they're going to try to gear those characters specifically for those bosses throughout the raid, so we could just be completely off regardless of how things are tuned.
Right. That's very important. And I think it's going to be a really interesting tier as well, because I think the right move for world top 5 guilds that are planning to try and kill the jailer without double legendaries, is going to be very different from world top 50 guilds, which normally it's not that different, right? Normally it's you play mostly the same comp and you're a bit more geared, but double Legos might be a huge change in that. Before we get...
I do actually think it will.
Yeah, we'll cover all that. That's a bit of a teaser. Skip ahead if you're interested in skipping ahead to that discussion. First, we've got some news to cover from 9.2. And first, we've got Actually, that's not what we're going to do first. Here. So first off, this is about tier set crafting in 9.2, which it's called the Creation Catalyst. We don't know when this will be available, and in the interviews they suggested this might be something that comes fairly deep into the patch. I don't know when a good guess would be, but for me, I feel 6 weeks even in, maybe 7 weeks, something like that, into the patch before this becomes available isn't unreasonable. Could be any time though. Basically, we still have no idea where this will be, but there's some new strings that have been discovered in the data mining, or just on the PTR, which seem to indicate that the Creation Catalyst has a limit on how often you can craft a tier piece, right? The Catalyst is recharging and will be functional in a certain amount of time. And after upgrading this item, the Catalyst will need a certain amount of time to recharge. And then you can upgrade a certain amount more items after this until the Catalyst needs to recharge. So maybe it's on some kind of recharge cooldown, right?
Or weekly, or
weekly
it could be
amount?
a week. Yeah. This does not surprise me. Does this surprise either of you two that they're limiting the amount of tier that you can craft to where you're not able to just slam all 5 of your pieces, or all 4 of your pieces that you really need?
Well, we already know it's limited by being not immediately available at the start of the patch, right? Yeah. And it's limited by the fact that it's going to cost you Cosmic Flux for this process as well. Now, Cosmic Flux is a currency that drops from everywhere. It's like Echoes of Nihilitha, right? So I have 10,000 on my, I have a couple thousand on my PTR character just from doing some keys. So you get a lot of this currency pretty quick, although we don't know how much a lot of Cosmic Flux actually is, because we don't know how much anything costs. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be that surprised if... I would be surprised, I guess, if it, like, unlocked more than a month into the patch, and then it also took, like, a week to do each item or something like that. But maybe.
Yeah. So whenever I first heard about this, I was like, if that time is 1 week, honestly, that seems kind of fine to me. I don't even feel like I would even be that upset. It makes sense. It's really cool for Mythic Plus only players that want to get their tier. Sure, it's like a 1 week in between crafting pieces of tier, but you only need 4 pieces, right? That's how I kind of view it, is that you only need 4 pieces of tier. And so 4 weeks to be able to get your set, I don't view this as a problem. I actually think that this is a better system than we've had in the past, and I think that I don't even know if this is the perfect system, but I think that this is very good, assuming that time is a week and not like 3 weeks or something.
The only bad thing about it, I think, is if it comes out like 6 weeks in and then it takes a week to get every piece, that's 10 weeks of the patch without the 4 set for the Mythic Plus only players or PvP only players. And that is like a bit too long, in my opinion. I think by maybe week 6, you should be able to get your complete set. Maybe a little bit sooner. I don't know.
Sure.
But like my current plan is to not raid at the beginning of this tier because I've been so busy. So I'm really hoping I get my super broken 4 set from a Brewmaster a little earlier than 10 weeks in.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the system itself is so good. Like, it's such an upgrade over not having this, right? And over just having the tier pieces drop from raid, that I'm willing to be pretty flexible with the specific numbers, as long as it's not something like absurd. I'm probably going to end up being okay. Again, the fact that it's like you can upgrade a certain amount more items after this until the catalyst needs to recharge, that sort of line makes me think that it's going to have some flexibility built in, right? And it's not going to be like the way Conduit Energy like worked, where it was just mean to you in every way it could be.
I also think that it's like one of these systems where you're also getting so much tier from raid. If you even step foot into like a heroic raid or something like that, or like a normal raid, if you pug it and you pug one of those tier bosses, there is so much tier that you can acquire from that. It's almost shocking if you kill all of the tier bosses and don't get a piece of tier. Like, it is actually unlikely that you would get 0 pieces.
Because each boss drops 4 pieces of bonus tier loot. So across the 5, that's an average of 1 per person in the raid.
That's
in a Mythic raid.
Assuming it doesn't conform to flex loot
Yeah,
rules.
It drops it at a ratio of, you have a 20% chance in Mythic.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a lower than 20% chance below Mythic of getting, although I think even on normal testing, it's dropped that same rate of 1 for every 5 people when bosses die, and it's just extra loot on top of the rest of the loot of the boss. And you can get tier pieces from any single slot in your Great Vault as well. All 9 slots in the Great Vault can roll into a tier piece according to a string that's been found. So class set items may appear as a reward in all 9 Great Vault slots, which it's going to make it even harder to get the File of Putrefaction and IQD. They note here, but it does make it a lot easier to, especially like if you factor in the multiple different sources, right? You get 1 piece from like a normal raid, you got 1 piece from a Great Vault, and then all of a sudden you only need to make 2 pieces from the Creation Catalyst, and you got your 4 set. And then like over the next month, you're upgrading those lower item level pieces to Mythic.
Yeah, I've actually forgot about both those ways of acquiring set pieces. So if both of them stay that way, and if bosses still drop a lot of tier, which is kind of weird to me, I hope it stays that way though, then I think the 10-week acquisition of making your own Mythic high level tier set is fine. Especially if the bosses drop that much. Like, you can literally get heroic 4 set as a non-raider within a couple weeks on average, I think.
Probably, yeah.
This has to be the most friendly tier setup I've ever seen, by the way. It's not particularly close. It's just being able to like hand select tier from PvP, Mythic Plus, and Raid out of the Great Vault, because any of the pieces can have it on them. In addition to be able to crafting your own from the Creation Catalyst and getting additional pieces of bonus loot from Raid, that is a lot of tier that you can acquire.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic as well, because so often exciting new systems have like acquisition being a pain point for a lot of people, and it looks like they are taking multiple different swings at making that not the case this time. So
I like this. Yeah.
very encouraging news on the tier set front. It hopefully this means it's a system where people that don't like the system, it's not going to be because they had a hard time getting a 4 set, right? It's going to be like they legitimately don't enjoy how the system plays for another reason. But almost all of the criticism that tier sets got in the past was like, only raiders get this, right? Or like, oh man, I had to do so much annoying work to get this. But here it does seem like, if you play the game a lot, doing pretty much anything, you're going to get your set bonus, even if it's like a little bit later. And if you do everything, you're going to get it really quick into the start of the patch. Like, I think mythic raiders that do, like, particularly if your guild does any kind of split run degeneracy, I think you're going to have 4 sets on most of your raid on like week 2 mythic.
And like you pointed out, like this article does talk about file putrefaction and IQD being like reduced drops. I feel like that's something I'm willing to give up. Is that not the case for you guys? I feel like this is just like a really good system, and this is just like collateral. I'm not even that upset about it.
I am 100% agreeing with that. Like, you can farm both those items out of.
Yeah, you can't get them at mythic, like, right? Like this is for the people that 252 is really different than 246 for them, right? Which I think that's like a mental block more than actually really important thing.
Yeah.
But like you would only want the 252 if you're that person early on in the tier, but you'd also rather see a mythic tier piece in that slot instead, I think. So
it's certainly a selfish choice to take the 252 trinket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless your whole guild already has tier, which, maybe I could see us in a couple weeks being this point where it's like, yeah, I have 30 pieces of tier. I'm looking for all my other slots. The game has 70 different ways to give me tier pieces and only one way of giving me good bracers for them to drop.
I'm never going to complain about this system. This system seems like
please, I hope I have that problem.
Yeah, but again, if that problem exists, I don't know. I think that
okay
indicates they've succeeded.
Yeah.
We've also seen on the PTR some changes to the encrypted affix. They've swapped around which buff is on which relic. So the woe relic is now the one that gives movement speed, and it also now has a DR, and it now lasts for 20 seconds only, but it stealths you the whole time for as long as you're out of combat in that 20 seconds. So that makes it a lot less awkward than before. But nobody I've seen is ever taking this because they have made the which used to give that stealth and shroud one, give 200% spell and ability cooldown rate, and restore 10% health and mana every 1 second for 10 seconds. And this is currently bugged on PTR, so that first off, there's a couple of spells that it doesn't affect, but it should. But also, any Covenant ability is apparently being affected by 800% increased CDR rather than 200%.
600.
Okay.
Yeah, I think is the number that was floating around.
Which is, for example, it takes my a minute 20 Weapons of Order cooldown down to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So as soon as we get that buff, I like slam Weapons of Order, and then I can almost press it again when it comes out.
It's completely absurd for a few specs. For specs that gain cooldown reduction from effects, right? Like your Blizzard removes 1 second from your Frozen Orb cooldown. Oh, that's being tripled as well now, right? So your Frost Mage rotation is Frozen Orb Blizzard, Frozen Orb Blizzard, Frozen Orb Blizzard for the duration of this. Pretty much.
Shifting power.
Yeah, Night Fae has even further cooldown reduction implications there. So
yeah, that's fun. That was a fun one to test this week.
I've done a couple of keys with this, and it is just a blast to play with right now. But it depends on which spec you're playing, because the Moonkins in my group, now to be fair, most Moonkins are just kind of always depressed losers, but he was being a real depressed loser about this effect not being any cool for his spec.
Yeah, all three of us actually did keys. If you watch any of our VODs this week together, they were a lot of fun for anyone interested in seeing the new affix and changes in action.
This season, I just show up to simp the homies. I'm really just about the boys this season. I am not a main character.
And then they also changed the haste one, which was the woe effect. Now it's on Vi, which means that's the more annoying mob to kill. That's the one that teleports around, and it's harder to kill it early into a pull. And it gives a little bit less haste, but it also makes you have a damage or healing proc on your target. So Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, from testing, that damage proc doesn't seem great. Like we didn't take it very often, but when we did, it hit for like an average of 1k when it procced.
it procced quite a bit though, right? It was procking like, I don't know, some quite large amount of times per minute, especially when you factor in this gives you more haste as well. So
it's maybe like every other second or so is procking for me, but I don't know. We didn't see it that often. It didn't seem overwhelmingly strong, at least.
I think. Okay, I actually do think that haste one is good, especially if you need it to burn. Okay, so you would use that on something like Hakar, I think, because you want the upfront like burst that haste and that damage proc is going to provide you, because you're trying to get through the boss in a timely manner. I do think that haste thing has good general use.
I don't know. I think the CDR is just, it's going to be more value for depending on what your comp is.
I mean, okay,
like if you've got a rogue in your group that gets to cast 2 flagellations in that window because of the CDR, like.
Well, I think you're both right. I think the CDR is now like the main option you choose as of current tuning, and the haste one is situational, like Tettle said. Like maybe a few situations where you'd want the just slightly instant extra damage.
It's comp dependent as well, right?
Extra CDs.
Yes, like, Moonkin and like Destrolock fucking hate that CDR one.
Hey, dude, Destrolock, you can Havoc something sooner. Havoc uptime.
They just have their. I mean, they just have permanent Infernal. It's just like their Infernal's always out. So,
anyways, it's I think an exciting set of changes to the encrypted affix. I think I'd like to see some more. I don't know what they can do for the stealth DR one. Maybe it's just a case of like, once you fix that bug with the cooldown reduction one, that helps make it more worth. But I think maybe just increasing the time on this even further, and maybe even buffing the DR also, so that it's like you get a shroud and then also the next pull is easier. I don't know.
Yeah, the DR alone isn't enough to like consider taking it a lot of the times, because on paper you want something that helps you in combat most of the time. Like sometimes you want the movement speed to get really far to the next pull, like in the other side we talked about going through the gauntlet, but otherwise it only gives you 15% DR. So what are you going to take it for? Like you want 20 seconds of 15% DR for something in the middle of a trash pull? I don't think so.
I think they could maybe just give you like 40 seconds of stealth as well. Like if it just did that, it would make it so easy to use for skips. Because even at 20, it's like, it's kind of awkward. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also hard not to kill the mob during the pull. So you need to like carefully avoid cleaving it till the end of the pull. And then
it's not like impossible challenge anymore like it was when you had to drop combat to get the stealth, but it's still pretty tough.
I'm kind of down for it to be niche though. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't need to be universal. I'm down for it to kind of be niche.
That's true.
As long as it's takeable. As long as it's takeable. Like seriously, as long as it's takeable.
You do only take it in like one spot right now, right? Like it's the DOS one that you take. Do you take it anywhere else?
When you need a stealth, right? Like if you're
Inspires, maybe there's one at the.
I think it's just worse than like taking one of the other ones and then using an invis pot, though. I don't know.
That's what we always did. We just killed one of the other ones and then used an invis pot.
Well, it's not appealing relative to an invis pot, and I don't know. I think they should make it lame that way.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd rather there be 2 very, very competitive choices. Like if they buff the haste one right now, I think that'd be cool. And then they leave the movement speed as the niche one. That'd be a nice setup, in my opinion.
Yeah. Again, it's kind of nitpicking at this point because like it's already even just the changes they made here, even just the like super OP CDR one is already really fun for me at least.
How do you guys like this affix so far? I think that we've all played it a decent amount. Do you guys like it?
I like it a lot. Mm-hmm.
I'm down.
I'm also of this opinion. I've also thought about this a little bit recently. I really like seasonal affixes. I think just generally, even okay. So this is gonna be a hot take. I didn't think that Prideful was that bad.
Disagree.
I disagree on Prideful. I like seasonal affixes in theory. I don't know. I think Prideful is just the dungeon became about the Pridefuls, and so every dungeon was just about the Pridefuls. And
but I think that's because dungeons got solved.
Maybe.
I think it's because you let the season drag on for too long.
I don't know.
Well, to me, it's just they were so oppressive. Like they were just so ridiculously challenging.
Yes.
For one single mob that you had to kill 5 times every single dungeon. Like at least make Shadow of Azul only in King's Rest and not in dungeons 5 different times.
Fair. Yeah. All right. That's fair.
Anyways, I like this affix. I like seasonal affixes as well. I think that, like, Prideful, honestly, even though I think it was pretty close to being good. I think if Prideful just didn't scale as much into high keys, it would have been a pretty good affix.
I agree.
Tormented, I don't mind as well, though I'm not super attached to it. But I think the BFA ones, with the exception of Beguiling, were all either good or good ideas, like good attempts.
Yeah. I was going to say Beguiling is the worst of the worst, just because even if they would have tuned it lower, it still would have been really, really lame to play around. Like both the Tides Emissary and the Void Emissary were just so hard to deal with anything at the same time as them.
You know your seasonal affix is busted whenever on the 11th week you see some like orientation for Temple of Sethralus that you hadn't seen before, and they immediately hotfix it because of a Dratnos tweet like 5 hours before that week goes live, because that pack is unplayable.
I tweeted that screenshot. It was teaming Void week, and so there was just a Void Emissary and 5 Dervishes. And I just tweeted this screenshot.
So
like, what are you supposed? What is you supposed to do about this? You can't even
kill 5 Dervishes, let alone a freaking Void Emissary.
Oh,
unskippable too.
Fuck, that was the worst affix. I'm glad that they've gotten better.
It was like on top of the boss. Oh, it was so bad.
That was like late into the patch.
That was
even early.
I love how Dervishes, the right answer for those was just to have a Hunter pet tank them because they didn't auto. And so you just had your Hunter solo that room while the other 4 people in your group did the rest of the dungeon.
Thank God Hunters were OP at the end of that patch. Oh, man.
Yeah.
That affix, I deserve time back for ever playing that one.
All right, let's move on to our tip of the week segment. My tip of the week is time sensitive. So if you're listening to this on YouTube or podcast feeds or whatever, you probably already missed it. But for those of you watching live, this one's a special treat for you. In North America right now, all 3 callings for the 2nd day in a row are located in Maldraxxus. I didn't think this was going to be possible. It was true yesterday, but today a Maldraxxus calling disappeared, and the one that replaced it was another Maldraxxus calling. So you can go to Maldraxxus and do 3 callings all at once and get 3 renown points for the low price of about 10 minutes of your time. It's a really great deal. It might still be there tomorrow, but it's pretty unlikely. This is the kind of thing that only comes around every once in a while, and now that emissaries are gone and you got to go pick up your callings manually, I think a lot of people would miss it because emissaries were so much better than callings. But here we are, and that's a good way to get renown if you don't want to do it any of the other ways. Or between queues for Comp Stomp, you use all 30 seconds of the time you're allowed before you click accept to keep working on your callings. There you go. That's efficiency right there.
Man, I thought that was going to be so much more important than it was. Like he wrote on the show notes and everything in all caps, time sensitive tip of the week.
I have a question, Trell. Do you think that one was better or worse than the way you face the orientation of your Hearthstone optimization that he gave us 1 week last year?
That was just a good tip.
I think the Hearthstone was actually a good tip. I've heard people say they learned that at some point, and I'm like, yeah, that was actually a good one.
That's not a good one.
Right. Dude, that's the nice thing about that one though is our podcast is it's been enough episodes I can probably just run that one back in a future week and
fuck, that's a good one.
All right, Trell, what is your tip of the week?
All right, so this isn't on live yet, but when the patch launches, I'll be doing lots of Tazavesh Mythic Plus at some point, I assume. So this is a week where I put in the show notes, and we can put in Discord as well, that solves the first boss for you in Pugs. Basically, whoever goes to the console with this week aura will post in chat which direction to go with each color, because you have like 4 colors you got to put in each different console around the room. So if one or more players has this, then I think it's a pretty easy fight, honestly.
It's a very good week aura. I would highly recommend getting it. Something that you need to know though is if you are the receiver, if you're not the person who's inputting all the console commands, if you are on the receiving end of it, whenever if you have to do it a second time, and the person doesn't mash reset like early enough, it's going to immediately give you like a place to go to. Assuming that this isn't bug fixed yet by this point, it's going to immediately give you a place to go to before they even input anything and resend it. So you just have to sit there and wait for a second for them to resend it. So your thing may change. It just kind of depends.
And I think there's probably several different versions of this week aura or similar week auras floating around out there. So like I would just test it out the first time you use it, make sure it's working properly, you know. But having something like this will help a lot.
Incredibly good.
All right, Tettles, let's take a look at your clip of the week, which is one that I've seen before. I like this one a lot.
Dude,
so why don't you walk us through what's happening here?
I should not be allowed to play Kyrian. This is like the first time I've done dungeons as Kyrian ever, and I didn't realize that Braun is just the most grief mob of all time. And so I pull these mobs in stealth, which normally isn't an issue because I'll just die. But these mobs global combat your whole entire party if you accidentally pull them. And so I just grief the shit out of my party by accidentally pulling those mobs.
So this is just Braun. Yeah, you can get like a button to dismiss Braun, right?
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So if you're playing Kyrian,
Braun's not.
Do that, and it'll make your life a lot better.
Honestly, like my group has 3 Kyrians in it. At least this patch, we had 3 Kyrians, and we all eventually had to put macros on our rotational abilities to cancel the bronze stacks, so that he would literally never spawn. Like he was that bad of depleting our keys.
Like because he just shows up and knocks things out of a CC or whatever, or knocks things in weird ways.
Yeah, he'll show up and knock like 3 important mobs back into a sanguine puddle for like 2 seconds, or he'll like knock someone's kick right as they go to kick it, and then they don't have a kick for the cast that recast right after. And then, you know, all the stealth skips like Tettle's experience, he's a problem for. It's just so troll.
Why doesn't he stealth like other guardians or pets? Like, what? Why isn't he in stealth? All
Good
other
question.
like guardians and pets will stealth. And if they walk through a pack of trash, they will not pull it. And that guy just engaged that pack.
I don't know. It just wouldn't be realistic for him to stealth. You see, he's dummy thick.
True, this is class fantasy for Braun.
He is dumb thick. This is true.
All right, our main topic is around Shadowlands, the Sepulcher, the first ones, meta classes, what we think is going to look good. So to update anybody about how much information we have right now, we have all the tier sets. We have the Covenant Legendaries. We have all that kind of stuff. There's been a lot of balance tuning. There might be more. We've tested the first 8 bosses on normal. We've tested the first 8 bosses on heroic. We've tested the first 8 bosses on mythic. And some people that are not me have also tested them on LFR, but I haven't done that. But they were testable on LFR as well. So the first 8 bosses have been tested on all 4 difficulties. And the last 3 bosses have as yet not been tested, and it seems increasingly likely that they're going to not be tested. As Blizzard said, they hope they'd be able to not test them.
Worried but optimistic is how I would describe myself.
Yeah.
Because, like, man, if these bosses are good, that ends. Like, the fact that they weren't able to test them is really cool. If they are bad, then it just ruins everything. And there's no redeeming qualities if they're buggy messes, which, God, I hope they're good.
Yeah, testing has been a bit hit or miss. I would say it's not the most buggy testing has ever been, but there have been a couple bosses that were pretty scuffed.
I would say that this is definitely on the better end of testing. Like there were raid tiers where you're just like, damn, this boss needs to be fully reworked. I didn't feel like we had very many of those where I'm like, damn.
Halandris was one for me, but to their credit, they have already changed a huge amount of that about the Dungeon Journal, so it looks like that fight. I
expect them to change that.
Well, yeah, the mythic testing we did on that, it was like fundamentally broken in 2 different ways that made it so that it was both impossible to do the fight as intended and possible to do the fight as not intended, which was pretty funny. But they basically just chopped like half the mechanics and added a couple new ones on that. So we'll see how that one ends up working out. The other early bosses in the tier, I don't see them being that much of a brick wall for good guilds that are going to be able to kill the last 2. I think Anduin is going to be potentially the first time that guilds get really brick walled.
I think Artificer is also going to be a wall.
Artificer's like the 3rd boss, though. I don't know. Artificer Normal even was a case of like Artificer Normal was like Mythic boss difficulty on testing. So to me, that's one where it's just like there's no way it's making it to live with that level of difficulty on at least on normal.
On normal, that was a lot of coordinated movement, which is surprising for a normal fight.
Yeah, the last 30% of that boss on normal is like a very intricate dance that one shots you if you mess it up, and your whole raid has to do, and your tanks one shot you if they mess it up as well. So
Oh no, don't like to hear
Or-
that.
yeah,
What were you gonna say, Troll? Like, I didn't hear what you were gonna say. I accidentally cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. I was just gonna say my opinion's heavily skewed on this because I only tested Mythic Halandris and Mythic Anduin, and doing the Halandris on Windwalker, I was like popping every defensive known to man within 30 seconds into the fight because the damage was so broken. Like he was supposed to reset his stacks
Right.
that did AoE damage, but he wouldn't. And then they kept hotfixing the boss during testing, so it was just a messy boss.
All this
But
is
I
to say,
I did
everything's
take
been tested.
Anduin as DK, and that was a really cool fight. I like that one a lot.
yeah. I killed Anduin normal as well. I don't know if you guys did that as well, Tuttles. Yeah, you see the cinematic afterwards. The S. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
It was just-
I'm Tettle's very well-known cinematic watcher.
dude, it just
You skipped
it
it.
put up like a black screen, and then it just put up the letter S, and then it like had some test numbers or something up, and then it went away.
Dude, this is gonna be the fifth tier in a row where I just make up lore shit on some poor Race to World First broadcast because I don't know what I'm talking about again.
Yeah, I will say I think everybody is hyped about Anduin and like talking it up as being a great boss. I will say that people said that about Kel'Thuzad last year. That was the
Oh, no.
meta of discussions about PTR testing
Okay.
was Kel'Thuzad is going to be the best boss, like is going to be an amazing boss fight, right? Because it looked like it was going to be from testing, and it ended up being pretty bad, right? So we got to be careful. Things change.
I do think Anduin is a more well-designed fight than Kel'Thuzad at least is. I don't know if it's going to be... It can be a worse boss if it's criminally tuned and cringe. However, it is a more complete fight, and it has a lot of things that you have to do that make sense.
Right, but I mean that's you're saying that not having actually done the fight, right? Not having actually like attempted
Correct.
to kill the boss, right? People said the same things about Kel'Thuzad before they've realized like, oh, we just stop damage and do this, right? And Anduin I could easily imagine Anduin being pretty similar, where it's just like, yeah, we're gonna actually do this in an extra phase every time,
I mean-
because if there's not a mechanic to punish, which maybe there's not, and it's gonna be a safe and
Well,
slow strategy.
It's also kind of similar to Kel'Thuzad because there's like an up phase and down phase that you have to kind of balance the damage and healing going on and stops as well.
Right.
But at least in this case, the down phase doesn't have like a strict requirement as long as you just kill everything. You don't have to kill it at like the exact same time. You can kill the stuff downstairs first, and then the upstairs can finish.
Right.
They don't have to be within like 4 seconds or whatever it was initially for Kel'Thuzad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful about Anduin as well. I'm just, we there have been bosses that have been pretty praised from their testing that have turned out pretty bad. Fate Scribe was another example. Everybody was like, oh my god, Fate Scribe. It's going to be the
Oh,
highest
sure.
IQ boss encounter to ever be created. Guardian of the first ones.
Yikes.
It's going to be Sludge Fist, but even more epic and cool. And then so people got to Painsmith on live and they were like, this is going to be the single best raid tier of all time. This is Painsmith and it only gets better from here. And then after Painsmith died and the next 3 bosses died in the next like 12 hours, everybody's like, oh
This is the most cringe raid tier I've ever seen.
no. So yeah, definitely a thing to think about. So anyways, that is a little bit tangential to the main topic here of what classes are going to be good as a result. But suffice it to say, I think that Anduin, what's good on Anduin is likely to be somewhat important. But realistically, like what's good on Rygalon, Lords of Dread, and the Jailer is even more important if it can be figured out in time for people to, have those ready, which, the fact that it's not being tested, maybe not. Maybe it depends on what guild you're talking about in this kind of case as well.
The dungeon journals are available to read through. Have either of you guys read through them?
No, not at all for the last 3.
I have, yeah.
I have as well.
But it's like, again, it's just, I don't know. It's hard to identify what all the words actually mean for what comps are going to be good.
I kind of feel like I know a decent bit about Jailer normal, but it's all subject to change. Like it's not even been publicly tested, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so while I feel like I know what it says in the Dungeon Journal and what that actually equates to, it's not going to come out to like. I have a good idea of like what I think, but it's all subject to change. And I think that's the biggest thing is like all of this is subject to change based on a lot of different variables.
I'm super excited to watch Liquid and Echo Prague, like the 9th and 10th bosses at nearly the same time, and like have to learn on the fly and see like how they develop faster than the other, or like what strats they develop in real time. That'll be so cool.
This Race to World First, it could be just the best one ever because it could be just like two guilds trading blows on bosses that have neither have seen before, and like coming up with good strats and gaining like a bunch of hours back and forth, and then getting to the jailer and like blind progging it against each other. Or there are some disaster cases that the way that Blizzard has set this up has opened up as well. One of them being if those bosses are buggy and it's just a case of like when Blizzard just pushes the hotfixes, it just eliminates time from whichever guild is ahead until they do, which has happened before. That's happened on a lot of bosses before. Yeah, Jara was a pretty big example of that. Fetid Devourer, I think, as well. Another one you could look at in the past.
Was that way for a little bit too.
Yeah, N'Zoth was Limit at the time. Liquid now lost a lot of time to that, but they were just so far ahead that it didn't actually end up mattering. But they did lose time to the way that bug fixes worked out on N'Zoth as well. So yeah, 3 untested bosses, the potential for that is obviously huge. There's also the case of like the bosses are just undertuned. They're easy because they haven't been tested, and there's just a strat that would have been attempted on PTR and the devs would have seen and fixed that just makes it alive because it didn't get PTR tested. So that's another case where we could see something. I mean, that's kind of what happened with the end of Sanctum, right, where the last couple bosses just fell over really quick because of strategies that weren't how the fights were being intended. I think that risk is also higher when things aren't tested. So
side note, if there are any developers who want to come on the podcast and talk about the final 3 bosses, we would love that.
Dude, we could make an embargoed episode as well. We could wait to
shit, I'm down. I am down.
That would be sick. Also,
Somehow
that rings a bell though.
Yeah.
I watched the Path of Exile reveal today from GGG, and they like Chris Wilson was on the screen, and to the side he had his like on-call developers ready to answer some questions for him, and I think they discovered like 11 bugs just from questions being asked from the audience. So that it is kind of concerning that these bosses aren't being tested for a while. Like maybe there's 11 bugs that they're gonna have to learn on the fly, but
I think if there's just 11,
glorious.
We're good. We're all set. It's gonna own.
Agreed. Agree with that.
True.
If there are only 11, I'm in.
The other interesting case about how Race to World First is going to differ from, normies is they are not going to have their double legendaries until the 3rd week of Mythic Progress, if that remains unchanged. I do think there's a chance Blizzard will change that, but I don't think it's actually as big of a chance as I think many do. I would put that at like 5 to 10% if I was a betting man, which I am, if anybody wants to bet. So 5 to 10% is around where I'd set that line on them changing that timeline, which means that first off, there's that another disaster case for the Race to World First is the boss is really hard. It goes to 14 days. The 15th day begins. Liquid collects their double legendaries, gains 10% DPS, and rolls up and one-shots the jailer, which is pretty close to what happened on Sylvanas on the 2nd week. Not quite as much, but kind of close, and would have been a huge disaster if things had gone slightly differently. So may end up happening. It's definitely a risk that is introduced with doing it this way. Although it's worth saying there hasn't been a tier that's gone over like 11 days since Kill Jaden. So 5 years ago.
I hope 21-day raid tier.
Tell the sea money in the sky.
Yeah, tell me you get paid by the day without telling me you get paid by the day.
Please, I'm down.
The other, so yeah, that's the Race to World First like implication there. But the other implication is just normie guilds might have completely different comps that end up being good on these bosses than guilds that are attempting to secure this kill without the double legendaries, right? And a lot of specs are going to change hugely in value based on getting this. Now, I don't think it's quite as big a deal as maybe some do, right? Some people are like, oh, it's a 10% gain for some specs, but every spec is gaining something, right? So it's a question of like the relative difference between like the best specs and the worst specs with the double Legos, plus the baseline as well, right? So those are the.
Plus just a weekly vault on that day when they would get the double Lego. Like that's just like in my mind, like a 12% average gain on damage.
Right? Yeah. No. The whole raid's power level is going to be huge, but the question of like specs relative to other specs, how much that ranking changes when the double Legos show up. I think it will still look a lot like it did before, but I think there will be changes, but I don't think you're going to see something going from the bottom of the list to the top or vice versa. I think you're mostly going to see things changing like a couple places, like a tier and a half on the tier list tops.
Well, I mean, at that point in the tier, they'll be fighting the final boss, right? And something that minute might be worth swapping someone out or in because they're a different class that is now relevant. Like in Castanetheria, we didn't see Ellie Shaman hardly at all, right? Because they didn't get their legendary until right after Prague.
Yeah.
From the world boss rotation.
Yeah, and may have, yeah.
Yeah, and we probably would have if they had the legendaries. So it's like, if that day hits, do you swap in that slightly better class now, even though they're less experienced on the final boss? That'll be really interesting.
It is going to be really interesting for Race to World First. For guilds below that, right? For guilds below the world top 5, I think the question it becomes a more obvious answer of like, let's plan for double Legos, right? Let's assume we're going to kill Jailer with double Legos and build a comp accordingly, right? So we're going to mostly talk about that, although I guess we'll mention a little bit in cases where it is the double Lego that is adding the power to specs. So let's start by talking a little bit about tanks. And Trell, your Brewmaster tank has got a pretty nice tier set going, if I do say so, for kind of all cases, right? It's not just big mass AoE, right? It's also just kind of good for single target dam, right?
It's decent. I wouldn't say it's actually that great for single target raid scenarios. Survivability wise, it's really good just because of the max HP, but it doesn't really increase your single target that much. So the numbers you see in Mythic Plus are quite different than the power bonus you'd see in raid. But as far as tanks go, I think lots of tanks are very close in raid to each other, except for Prop Paladin, which is busted and does unlimited amounts of single target damage.
Yeah, Prop Paladin, it's a case of like, if your Prop Paladin can survive the fight, they are doing twice as much damage as other tanks.
I would also say that Blood DK seems like it's very encouraged to mandatory for a decent number of fights.
It's like Anduin. The life experience of having a Blood Death Knight downstairs versus not having a Blood Death Knight it's worth like it kind of almost doubles the whole group's damage down there because it groups everything up so nicely.
Do you ever 3-tank that? Like you would potentially consider 3-tanking that fight just to have a Blood DK?
We've been talking about that kind of thing a lot on that fight, and it's not the only fight where Blood Death Knight has seemed good as well.
First boss.
Yeah, first bosses.
Meme, but
unlikely to be one that's relevant for your comp, but yeah, I do think that the Blood DK looks good for specific fights, so I'm pretty sure that all the like super serious guilds are just going to use Blood DK on those fights, but I think it might also just be not bad unironically to use unironically.
Yeah, I think the other tank that was a bit on my radar was Brewmaster Monk, and it comes down to like how good realistically Mistweaver ends up being. Windwalker doesn't look that hot this tier for raid, I will admit.
Yeah,
Brewmaster is quite good, but you're not like, I think that you would just run a Blood DK through the whole entire raid if you do have a Mistweaver Monk. But it's going to come down to like how good is Mistweaver realistically, which the answer is it looks really strong. But there's a lot of utility stuff that's going to come into question, especially with healing and stuff like that is going to kind of mold like what you can play. Although, again, like I said, Brewmaster incredibly strong, but Prop Paladin and Blood DK definitely seem like they're probably the top two, right?
Yeah, I would say Prop Paladin is top one, and then I think the below that is maybe there's certain fights you want Blood DK, but I don't think using it for the whole tier is a favorite or anything.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about like the raid buffs for the tanks, filling in a raid buff if you need it, and then after that, it's about damage for tanks because these world first raiders are going to live on any tank they play. The only tank I could even see having a problem with anything would be maybe warrior, but they would still find a way to make it live.
I do think, yeah, so like the world first comp, I suspect pretty heavily it's going to be like both tanks have a prop pally. Maybe one of them has a prop pally, and then definitely at least one. Maybe both have a blood DK. Maybe one has a brew probably. Vengeance is one that it looked good on certain fights, but I'm a little bit worried about it in that sense of just like it takes a lot of damage on fights that hit the tank hard like Anduin. Anduin upstairs is just auto attacks quite attackingly.
Yeah, just pure physical damage, right? He has the stacking attack speed buff until he gets taunted. So.
Right, which like back in Castle Nathria, Vengeance was one of the best tanks, or was a pretty good tank against that on Sire Nathrius, but that was back before they like fixed and then nerfed Vengeance, and now Vengeance takes like 30% more physical damage relative to how much it did back then, so it's really pain champ moment. So I'm a little bit worried about that spec on that purpose. Warrior, kind of the opposite side of things. Any damage that has magic components, you're just like, ah. Any bleeds, which there are a couple, you're like, ah. So.
Yeah, poor Warrior, man. They also just don't have a good tier set, which is like.
And DPS Warrior looks good, right? So.
Yeah.
Who needs
like every other tank just has some sick power from the 4 set, and Prot Warrior's over there just like, where's mine?
You bring Battle Shout, of course.
That's true. Well, it's not. It's actually not Battle Shout. It's Rally. The thing about Prot Warrior is you get another Rally when you have one, which Rally is like the first Rally is good, the second Rally is good, the third Rally is pretty good. So that's the big selling point. But I don't know. Tanks, so that's how I expect it'll look in Race to World First. Honestly, I still think that tanks are close enough together that in most guilds, whoever you have that plays a tank well, whatever tank they play well, is going to be great in a way that, like, for a lot of BFA, it was worth it to, switch people onto Brew or whatever, even if they didn't like it quite as much. I don't think that's going to be the case this time. I think you have people play whatever they're good at, and it will continue to be a good choice, including Guardian Druid we didn't mention, but solid Jack of all trades still, and solid tier set as well. I
Kyrian
think
Link
look fine. Yeah, Kyrian Link definitely just a completely solid option. Might even be playable above that.
Yeah, the Kyrian Link's a good point. Usually Guardian Druid doesn't bring anything special. It doesn't have insane single target damage for prog, at least. It does on farm if you can go into Moonkin form. But it doesn't bring a raid buff, So if it doesn't have single target damage or a raid buff, what does it bring? But in this case, it could bring a lot more damage for one of the busted DPS players. Who knows?
Healers this is normally the segment where we start complaining about Disc Priest and Holy Paladin, but for the first time in a long time, it looks like Blizzard wants to change that, which is very exciting for me. So there's nerfs. There were the nerfs to Holy Paladin, and there have been pretty large buffs to the throughput healers, right? The Resto Druid, Holy Priest, Mistweaver Monk side of things as well, right? So,
Okay, so here's the deal. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how Blizzard has just decided to have throughput healers do 30% more healing than the other healers, and I don't fully understand it. And it's to a point where I think you still want a disc and a Holy Paladin. I think you still want one, but they don't look stackable. But then World First guilds really value their utility, so are they just going to be stacked even though they're worse? Like, kind of level? And I think that this is the role that's going to be the most reliant on what World First guilds do for what your normal guild will probably do, even though it probably shouldn't be. I think that, like, in general, you still want a disc and a Holy Paladin. I don't think you're ever going to get away from bringing at least one of them. I do think that the throughput healers are so good.
Do you think one Paladin is required, one H-Pal?
I think so.
Because I think if you have a Prop Paladin, I don't know if you need an H-Pal.
You need a Diva. You need a Diva Aura, so you at least need that.
You get that from a Prop Paladin, yeah.
I think on certain fights you may be right, but what if it's a stacked fight? Like, do you really need an H-Pal for that? You can just have another Disc Priest with a PI for someone and another barrier instead of...
That's true, and Holy Paladins being melee is kind of awkward on a lot of these fights. That's, it used to be Holy Paladins would kick the the enhancement shamans out of the raid, they'd be like, no, my melee spot. But now it's kind of the other way around. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll be curious to see. I think they can make it work with more Arshams and Disc Priests if they do enough throughput to carry like the just the DRs that the H-POW would normally have.
Dude, our shaman is doing a stupid fucking amount of damage too. Like unbelievable amount of damage. Holy Paladin level of damage, and they are doing like a substantial amount more throughput than them as well.
My speculation is there's still just going to be a Disc Priest and a Holy Paladin in like World First comps and in many top teams, and I would be more surprised by 0 than by 2 on either of those classes as well.
I really don't feel like they're stackable, especially Holy Paladin.
I think 1 is the most likely number, but I'd be more surprised by 0 than by 2.
That's fair. I agree with that.
Resto Shaman, also looks nuts. I think one of those is a fairly likely bet as well. That last slot, I do feel like Mistweaver is a pretty likely answer. I could also see a case of like you have 2 priests and they're just switching between Disc and Holy based on what the fight is, and that sort of thing kind of already happens with priests. It's like there's like 1 fight each tier where they play Holy, and that might be 5 fights where they play Holy.
If a fight is 4 healed, I would not be shocked if the comp is like a rainbow comp with a Mistweaver, a Resto Shaman, a Disc Priest, and a Holy Paladin. That I feel like that is a very that will probably end up being a very standard comp for next year.
How do we feel about
Laundress? Mistweaver was looking really, really strong too, because they could just revival off all the stacks of everyone in the group. I don't know if that's still going to be the case after the changes. I haven't looked at what they did to the boss, but
I think there is still a dispel, but it's different now. Like you dispel off the circles where the orbs come from now, something like that.
The moats.
Yeah. What do we feel about Resto Druids? They've also gotten some buffs.
They can certainly do a lot of HPS.
Yeah.
Resto Druid, they're the best at the way that they are also a throughput healer. I think that they're probably going to end up being slightly just worse than Mistweaver as a whole. But Resto Druid it's already not even that bad, but it's very hard to utilize them properly. Like they can almost solo heal phase 2 of Sylvanas. Like they are the things that they're good at, and they can solo heal the Painsmith intermissions. And the stuff that like they're strong at, they are so incredibly good at. I suspect that they're going to be a little bit more Mythic Plus niche than Raid niche, but I don't think that they're going to be bad. I think that this is going to be a tier where a lot of the healers are closer together than historically, but there's still this dichotomy and this breakup between throughput healers and then Disc and H-Pally, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like healer balance, I think it's pretty likely it's going to look like tank balance, where it's just like all of them are good and you can play whatever, which is so good if true, because healer balance has not been like that for several years, several expansion packs. So
that'd be nice.
I still think it's more likely that I'm like, I think it'll look kind of like that, but I could see it being very much not like that.
I got bad news for some healers next week, though. We're gonna try to get a healer guest on too to dispute my dumbass claims.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the healer balance in M+ next week, which also an evolving topic. Again, all of this is still pending some. I think there's pretty likely to still be some balance changes that maybe take a quick hammer to that Resto Shaman dam. We'll see though. All right.
I just think it's a little, right before we move on, I think it's unfair that the 2 throughput healers, Mistweaver and Resto Druid, are in such a good spot throughput-wise, but they also just do negative damage. And so it's like, if you can survive the boss without the throughput, then you're definitely not going to bring those healers for a World First group, right? Like, it's just going to be Disc Priest and Resto Shams, right? Maybe an H-Pal.
And that's why the World First heals valued the utility from the Resto Shaman and the Disc Priest so much, is just because, but I seriously think double Resto Shaman wouldn't shock me. They do stupid fucking damage.
I can see that.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is damage dealers, DPS. First off, the most important question with DPS that is always asked is how how is this tier going to be for melee? On one end of the spectrum, we've got tiers like Nighthold, where you could play as many melee as you wanted, and mechanics, in fact, were kind of friendlier to melee by virtue of not targeting them, and only targeting ranged in a lot of cases. And then you've got some other tiers, like pre-nerf Unot, where it's like melee is a hellhole. If you have more than 2 melee, none of them can do any damage, and they have to run away from the blaster mechanics, and those sorts of disaster cases. So most raids land somewhere in the middle. Most raids are more friendly to range than to melee, but the question is where this tier is going to land. I think it's going to be somewhere on average, personally, maybe a little bit melee unfriendly compared to normal. The couple of the bosses that have been tested so far, it has been kind of pain in melee.
So the issue with melee in this raid is like their uptime looks bad, right, Dratnos? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's some bosses, especially like, I mean, when you think about which bosses are going to be important, the most important boss we've tested so far has been Anduin. And Anduin as melee, the boss just like is shooting these stars out from directly under itself, and everybody needs to spread and like go run on top of somebody with a mark all this time. And just if you have more than a couple melee, they're not going to have uptime on the boss while they're doing all that stuff, and the range still will.
Artificer also has this really cringe movement for like they're going to lose a lot of boss uptime. In addition to that, the Jailer, that boss from the journal looks like it's not going to be like you're probably on the boss like near like where you're lining and stuff. But in general, I do seriously worry about melee uptime just as a general rule in this raid. But I don't think any ranged are like that compelling to bring is like one of the big things. So a lot of the times whenever it turns out to be a ranged tier, it's because there are some range that are like really, really strong. Not that many ranged feel like they're super turbo broken this tier.
Yeah, BM Hunter for a lot of testing was looking really good, but they've nerfed that quite a bit in the most recent build, so it's like down below marksmanship now. Survival, in fact, the pumpingest Hunter spec right now, although there are some interactions that may or may not be classified as bugs that may or may not make it to live with how that spec works right now.
Aren't there bombs doing like 380% damage on accident or something?
My understanding is it's more a case if they're just like double dipping reset and cooldown reduction effects in a couple spots too. I don't know. But on the other hand, Hunter had a somewhat similar bug that lasted all of Castle Nathria, where Serpent Stalkers was giving them another proc of Wild Spirits, and that was a huge DPS increase. That was part of the reason that spec was so good for that tier. So, you never know what's going to make it to live. I don't think it would be bad if Serp Hunter was like the pumpingest as well.
Dude, they would need a buff. Like if their 4-piece gets fixed, their 4-piece is turbo bug.
Right. No, I mean like if they just made it to live doing not substantially, but like the current amount of damage relative to everything else, I think it's still a question of like, are you putting them in your raid comp?
Oh, you haven't seen that shit in Mythic Plus, and it shows.
Mythic Plus, okay, I'm not talking about Mythic Plus, right? Like, Mythic Plus is not raid, right?
Okay, if they're doing raid amounts of damage, that's fair. They can't just leave them like that, because then they'd be doing 40k DPS in dungeons, man.
I don't know, have you seen what they did with Windwalker all the last patch?
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
I unfortunately
did. The Manhammer.
Yeah.
But I was also going to mention, I didn't do much testing this time as melee, but I usually do. But in testing, melee is always worse than on live because the strats just aren't there yet to make melee have more uptime. Like once you play on live, you'll watch the World First Raiders. They'll just have strats to make sure that melee can stay near the boss at all times, as much as possible at least. Like you have to move out for ground effects underneath the boss, but other than that, there's usually some kind of counterplay to alleviate that.
Absolutely, that's very true. A lot of the mechanics that are like most annoying on PTR do end up having strategic solutions for melee. That's a good point. Enhancement Shaman, one that we didn't talk about as well. That one was already good last tier. That was kind of the surprising tier, right, where nobody knew about it beforehand, but it ended up being one in every top guild run, right? Now the question is, I mean, I'm pretty confident there will be one in every top guild run. I wonder if there could even be more. Spec does a huge amount of damage, and it adds a huge amount of damage with Wind Fury as well.
That's. Did you have some for like a bunch of your testing, Dratnos?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
mu-
It's
That
it's
spec
a
is
very
like
high
one of
damage
the
spec.
top DPS specs. Yeah, like, okay, so people shit on Enhance all the time, and they're still pretty bad for Mythic Plus. Don't get it twisted. They're still pretty bad for Mythic Plus. Man, that spec does a lot of raid damage.
Yeah, and that's not even counting the Wind Fury, which is adding a lot of value to your melee group. Which, yeah, I think one of those is I bet on one, and again I'd be very surprised by 0. I think I'd probably be pretty surprised by 2 on Enhanced, but definitely I'd be more surprised by 0 than 2.
Yeah. Two is more likely than 0 for sure. I think it's just hard to get great value out of the second Enhance. It's definitely diminishing returns, but they are good damage individually. So it is definitely high on my list of specs that you are likely to see, at least at this current moment.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of likely there's going to be like a melee group, like a
Warrior's
5.
bad though, right?
Warrior's not bad, especially once you get your Covenant Legendary, Necrolord Fury, with the Necrolord Fury Legendary. You're doing a lot of damage. You do a lot of damage with that thing.
I was under the impression...
player. They're gonna have to banner people, man.
You just press banner, do a lot of damage yourself, and again, it's sort of like enhancement where you're adding some to friends, but you just in and of yourself are doing pretty huge damage with that legendary.
I was under the impression that Necrolord Fury, like I knew that Necrolord Fury was a thing, but I was under the impression that it wasn't very good. Okay, is that just completely?
We
wrong?
think it's going to be
obviously
quite
it's going to
good.
get brought. It's
Like,
obviously going to get brought.
We're planning to play 1 right now, and we're hoping to be able to find a way to play 2.
Okay.
So again, it's also a case of like this is a spec that's bringing Rally, and Rally is a extremely powerful raid cooldown. It's probably the best one right now.
Havoc, Demon Hunter.
I think we've got one of those in our planned lineup, but we'll see. We'll see how that one ends up working out. I mean, in order to not play it, you'd need to play Vengeance Demon Hunter, which, if you're not playing Vengeance Demon Hunter, congratulations. You're playing Havoc Demon Hunter, right? You're not giving up on Chaos for End.
The last couple of melee that come to mind are like Rogue and Feral.
DK as well. DK, DPS Death Knight, does some nice dam and adds those grips on certain fights too.
Hard to disagree. I think DPS DK is dead.
Fair enough.
Is it that
Bury
bad?
that shit.
I don't think so.
I don't think it's that good.
I think it's pretty good.
I've seen Rogue doing a lot of damage, I think.
Yeah, I think
With
one
several
Rogue
specs.
is a fairly safe thing to do too. All right.
I think Feral is also good. But
yeah,
it's like,
Feral's
you
been
need
cranking
to
the single
balance.
target as well. But again, Feral and Survival are both in that spot where it's like, right now on PTR they're doing a lot of damage. If they make it to live doing that much damage, which I think it's more likely than not that they're doing less damage when they make it to live than they are right now. But even if they make it doing the damage they are, I'm still not sure you'd play them. But I think you'd consider it.
They are one of the specs that, at least for raids specifically, gain not that much from their 4-set and gain not that much from double legendary.
Right.
So like they seriously could be one of the specs that like
Feral quite
is on the
likes
radar
it, right?
early on.
Feral,
No. Their 4-set is incredibly good on AoE.
right.
But
There's
it's
no
not
double
that
legendary.
stick on-
Don't they just run the Night Fae legendary unironically?
Yeah, they run the Night Fae legendary permanently.
Oh, but they
Their
don't have a
second
good-
legendary is that draft dog shit
I see.
legendary. That thing is awful.
Oh, we didn't talk about Shadow Priest, did we? Shadow
We haven't
Priest
talked about
is-
ranged
not
yet. Yeah.
Range.
Oh,
We're
true.
in a range.
Shadow
Warlock
Priest
and
is
Shadow Priest.
Shadow Priest has looked real good on testing. Now, the problem is the last 3 tiers that I've predicted what's going to be good, I've predicted Shadow Priest is going to be like the best ranged. So I'm deeply scarred about doing it, but it has looked so good. So I kind of think Shadow Priest is going to be the best.
Dude, I'm like 0-4 on my Shadow Priest prediction. I'm the exact same way. I think I predicted Shadow Priest every single raid tier, and they're always 0-1 for
Yeah.
every single fight.
I'm going to hedge and be like 1-2 on the Shadow Priest.
Again, for the how
Yeah.
many tiers in a row is this?
Well, I think I've been higher on them before even. So, yeah.
I mean, if Warlock's good, you just bring the Warlock. I mean, if both classes are good, you bring Warlock still, right? Is that still the case?
Warlock is nice because it's just so flexible. You've got 3 specs that do different things, and
Yeah.
it is really easy to use on different fights. Mage is kind of the same way as well, where it's just like you've got such a huge kit of different specs. And with the way this tier works, right, you're investing this gear in a character, not in a spec, right? With Shadow Priest, you're only getting Shadow Priest out of it. But when you invest that gear into a mage or into a warlock that can play those multiple specs, you end up getting just this huge value on multiple different kinds of fights. So I think there is some inherent safety for those classes in that. But I will see. If Shadow Priest is good on the last boss, that's probably more important than all of that.
Yeah, that's true. If there's a mass dispel.
Yeah, that's true.
Everything we're talking about almost goes out the window until they reveal the last boss and what's needed for that.
Moonkin is the one that Tettles thinks is going to be bad. Now, to be fair,
no, that's not what it said.
Let me tell you about what Tettles did last tier. Last tier, Tettles put Moonkin in S tier in his raid tier list, and then of the top 5 guilds to kill the boss, of the top 100 players that killed Sylvanas in those first 2 weeks, 20 of them were playing Moonkin. And Tettles said, I was wrong. They're not actually S tier. They're probably only A. And he asked permission from Wowhead to lower the ranking of Moonkin on that tier list after 20 of the top 100 raiders were Moonkins. So
it's better. It's actually better. I initially had them at A+ and wanted to lower them to A.
I remember that. Insane. Tettles is also the man that baited every Moonkin in the world to play Kyrian in season 1.
Yeah,
dude, no. I blame Blizzard. This is cringe Covenant system. I literally, or whatever.
And also the do you remember the Venthyr Night Fae? That almost ruined our friendship.
I was right.
The Venthyr Night Fae schism.
It didn't ruin our friendship. You and I are fine.
It almost did. Dude, there was
ruined some people's friendship.
There was hatred in his eyes a couple of times I needled him about that one. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I had a scoreboard. We'll see how the we'll see how the Moonkins end up looking this time. I think that once that double legendary comes out, they are fairly likely to have a couple spots, just because the Kyrian legendary is very powerful.
That is something I agree with. I think that they are awful until they get their 4-piece and their second legendary. Like so the first 3 weeks, I don't know. Maybe they'll be okay. I hope they're okay. But I do not think they're going to be good until they get their 4-piece and their second legendary.
All right.
Warlocks broken.
Warlocks
always.
I
always
think
broken.
I think it's just like a safe place to put your gear because they're just so likely to be something good they can do on fights. So yeah.
Demo looks good when it's good. Deathstroke looks okay in some spots. It's niche, but it's still very strong.
A couple fights I thought it'd be pretty good on. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
They also summon your people.
That's true. That except for in Castle Nathria for the first couple of weeks, you remember when summons just didn't work on NA at the start of that patch.
It's okay. AF was good anyway, so they just
I forgot about that.
That
was a rough patch.
Yeah.
Mage.
Yeah, I think again, just like 1 to 2 mages, hard for that to be that bad to have on your lineup.
Fire is kind of bad though right now.
Yeah, but Blizzard has never let fire stay bad for more than a couple weeks, right? There's
based.
Like that. It's a question. It's a question just like if the new Microsoft execs, if it was just the old Activision execs played Fire Mage and now they don't care about making that class good for them anymore, and it's the new Microsoft execs that play some new spec, that could be the big factor to change this. But again, that deal hasn't gone through yet, so let's see.
Maybe that's why HPAL finally got the hammer, because Activision had to transfer leadership, or that was part of the deal. That was actually part of the acquisition deal. They're like, you have to nerf HPAL right now. It's time.
Do you think it would just count as like Bill Gates' philanthropy if he just bought Activision so that he could eliminate HPAL? I think it would count.
Yes.
Yeah,
I would count that.
They're kind of
write that off on his taxes.
They're kind of the mosquitoes of the healing community as well, and Bill Gates goes after them, right? So, yeah, makes sense.
What did you call that bug?
What bug? Mosquito?
Did you say mosquito?
Mosquito.
Yes, he did. I've never heard it pronounced like that.
How's it pronounced?
Mosquito.
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 Dreadnoughts.
I'm saying the same way you guys are.
That's like me saying Draughtnose.
Droughtnose. That's like the high British way, the way the Queen pronounces it.
So
Wait,
Draughtnose.
All right, we've also got
right.
Hunters, which Gear the Spear, maybe play in the melee department, maybe.
Yeah, they're harassing your melee.
We'll see. Yeah, they for most of PTR they were looking real good as BM for damage, but now that's nerfed. I don't know. I don't know if you'd play more than just like we're gonna play one because we've got a good hunter in the guild. I don't know if we'll play that many more than one. We have a couple. We have 2 hunters. I don't know if we'll play 2 though. I don't know.
The thing about survival is it's still a melee spot that's very limited in number usually, and then it also is not a raid buff. So it's got to be like really, really good after training to be brought.
An elemental shaman is another one that their tier set is really nice for M+. It's really cool in M+. I don't know if it'll be a spec that clears the rating bar this time around.
I haven't seen an Ellie, actually. Like, most of the time I feel like I have like an okay understanding of where they land. I straight up just have not seen an elemental shaman this tier.
I haven't seen them in raid or mythic plus for testing.
Do you know anything about them in raid right now?
Yeah, I've seen. I think there's one or 2 of our testing days.
Okay.
I don't know. It looked okay. It was kind of that classic elemental like okay damage and not doing anything else, and it's just like you could imagine that the boss comes around and is like, you got to pick somebody to fire, and you just like go, you can't do that person, can't do that person. Could fire the Ellie Shaman, and you can't fire anybody else. All right, get out of here.
Yeah, it's just the worst version of, it's just a bad hunter, bad moonkin kind of level. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not extremely confident in that assessment because I am fairly low information, but as of right now, that's my expectation for the spec and
sure
high-end rating.
I think that is the spec that I probably know the least about right now.
I love Ellie Shaman as well. Ellie Shaman, some of the most fun I've had. I played Unat and Ajara as Ellie Shaman, and Unat in particular was just a banging fight on that spec. It was so fun. So
yeah, you got to onk every fight.
Yeah, dude, we the reason we played Ellie Shamans was because they could onk, and we just, on our kill, we used 0 battle reses. we used 2 onks, and so it just didn't matter at all. It could have been anybody doing it, but they also just did huge damage on that fight because you just had flame shocks on 3 targets that were all over the place all the time. It was so fun.
True. That was a cool fight in general.
Yeah, God, that fight was so good.
I think that Elemental Shaman's onk should reset with boss combat.
I agree. I firmly agree with that. Yeah. It's crazy to me that like Bubble does and Ankh doesn't. Like Bubble is 5 minutes and Ankh's 30. That's crazy.
Yeah. I feel like that. Obviously, that has some implications, but man, shamans
it would be
need
good
a
ones.
W.
It would be good implications for shamans, yeah, which is what they need.
Yeah.
All right. So there's our discussion of the specs in Sepulcher. We'll see how that all ends up turning out afterwards. Of course, any tuning changes on PTR between now and patch coming out will be hugely important. All of those other unknown variables will be hugely important as well. So, stay tuned. Let's move on to thanking of the patrons, the wonderful patrons over patreon.com/Titanforge, which, dude, some people here still have like 9.0 jokes as their names to be read out. Dude, you guys still listening? I feel like Netflix, where it's like, you still watching? But
pause.
Yeah,
you still watch?
Let us know if you want to update it, or it's fine. You can keep them, the old ones as well. Let's see though.
Not gonna complain.
Friendship with Riptide ended. Now Renewing Mist is my best friend. Dude, I don't know. Riptide's pretty good. My Rothocopter has entered the server. Schwa, schwa, schwa. How did I convince an Alliance pug to bring my 186 lock to a +2? I've seen some Growl videos with similar titles. It's like about the characters he snuck into groups for his like Pugging It Up series things. Jaw, Dranos' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Never Nude, Chewy, Boomkins are simping every damage doers, or Based. Delete Gaming, it's not AMZ, it's AMZ. Salty Senny, Necris, Tankdill, Nevuk, Brad Ceratops, Sinmora, Eevee's Survival Main, No Trick, I Scheduled Tettle's Flame, Lufer, Dymat, Nyx. PTR is giving me blue balls for 9.2. Yeah, that's the mechanic on the Holanders fight. Gallic, Brusif, Dratnos, Ratzer M plus rating is a disease. M Sanity, Xena. Rogue is now good enough for Prog, still bad enough to be sat for SLG, bless up. Red Color, youtube.com/Workbringer, Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Evolved Gaming, number 1 Simsky for Trelsky. Chloric seems to accidentally get Lurka killed in keys a lot more frequently these days. Is it the tank's fault, or was Lurka out of position? I got flamed for not interrupting. I assume it's just always Lurka from what these have been. I got flamed for not interrupting in Arathi Base and Compstomp. Active this week, by the way. Compstomp gang. Milk. Benil, aka YOLO Swag Crew. Word around the Mage Tower is Trell has fantastic eyeballs and is now 3k. Sife, Pone, Windwalker Monks deal with nerfs by rolling with the punches, and Wonder. Thanks all for the support. It's Q&A time. Our first question comes from Glennis, who asks, I was looking up Race World First guilds this week, and it got me thinking, at what point do guilds stop relying on applications and instead actively recruit individuals? For example, Echo and the artist formerly known as Liquid don't have application links on their WoW progress pages, but Pieces and Method do. Even with those links, though, I highly doubt they're taking those apps seriously. It's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. I mean, everything I've heard from people in Liquid, it's just like word of mouth for the most part, right? Like if they know someone that's good, they'll investigate and then pick them up if they need.
I feel like I just perma poach people if I'm given the opportunity. Like if I feel like that's not even just like a Race World First thing. I feel like if I just have a vouch for people, it's always going to be a higher quality player than if there's completely unknown variables and you're just recruiting based off of like an application or something, right?
Yeah, my guild gets good candidates from apps from time to time, but we also definitely make some acquisitions, right? We especially when it's like, hey, we need a warrior. Okay, who knows a good warrior? Oh, they're in this guild. Okay, can we poach him? And
yeah,
we try and poach him, and that's I think a fairly standard way of doing it. I think
that is for people in like the range of guilds that we're in, but I don't.
Yeah, the Race World First is like, it's kind of another level on top of that, right? Because it's not like there's a huge stable of guilds that are pretty good rating those hours, right? It's like, you know, you need to find somebody who's willing to make that step up, or somebody who's already done it, which is a fairly small community. I know like Liquid Max mostly just he kind of just has a belief that someone is good, right? And then also like if somebody who he has that belief about says somebody is good, then that's good enough for him to bring him on board, basically. And so he's got a very high definition of what good is, and that's kind of just how they run the thing over there is, are you good or not? Which is, it sounds like an overly simplistic way of doing it, but it seems to work really well for them.
Well, I think when you've been around for this long and you like put so much thought and effort into high-end rating, I think it's pretty easy to tell when someone's really, really good at the game or very talented and they're just not playing to their potential. Like they're playing in a lower level guild and they might be hanging out with friends. And I think I've seen this like a dozen times now where I see a player picked up by limit and then all of a sudden they're just performing like 10% better because they're in the environment where they can express their full potential. And I think the Liquid guys are really good at telling who those people are at this point because they've done it for so long.
I would say it's really hard to know how good somebody is without having played with them. I would say like 99% of guilds can't really, like, that skill is really hard one to cultivate, right? Like I try really hard to be able to do that because I professionally talk about this kind of stuff, right? Like commentating MDI Race World First has a lot of like watching players and how they play, and so but like that is not thinking I'd be doing when watching people play if I was just doing it normally. So I don't know. It's definitely hard to do without just getting to play with somebody.
Yeah, that's true.
I do think that vouch though is a huge amount of it as well. Just like I think in top end guilds and also in the medium end guilds, it's if somebody in the guild, like that's how a lot of applications get or recruitments get made is a connection like that. Although I will say that M plus in particular for my guild hasn't been a good indicator of how good somebody is like if they have a high M plus score or have done M plus with people in the guild.
Yeah, I don't think you
miss.
can look at M plus if they're an M plus only player. That's usually a very bad sign for taking players for high end rating.
I mean, look, like BDGG picked up that Undad TV guy.
He was rating in Vision.
Don't worry.
Right?
No, you're rewriting history. You're rewriting
okay.
history.
All right.
He was a Mythic Plus Rogue one trick.
The Mythic Plus Rogue one trick's usually quite bad at rating.
Actually true.
But yeah, JPC Undad bucking the meta, right?
All right. I thought you were about to shit on JPC for no reason.
I would never. Taboo43 in Discord says, this will probably only affect the really top-end guilds, but I'm still curious. With the delay for double Legos and how tier set 4-piece are locked behind the last 3 bosses, will this affect what classes top guilds bring to Prague? Would they rather have a class that's stronger in the beginning, but doesn't get as big of an upgrade? Or will they choose the ones that'll scale with those double Legos later in the patch? I think that the 4 set... I think the like world first racers will plan for the 4 set because you can force it on the second and definitely by the third week with splits. So I expect that isn't going to be something that they will hedge around, but the double Lego thing, I absolutely think they like Moonkin. I think is a good example of something they might not use because it's going to be a wet noodle for a while, right?
I still seriously don't know how bad. Like I know that the legendary and the 4 set are a large amount of power. I don't know how bad it is, like realistically, without it, because I refuse to test it without, because that shit sounds awful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to acquire the 4 set. I think everyone should just be assuming that you have it for most of Prague, at least Mythic Prague, not Heroic Prague.
All right, next question comes from Ultramad in chat, who says, question for Q&A. Are keys closed this week? This is Raging Fortified Explosive week. I was tanking 22s last week with no problem. Now I'm getting destroyed during Incarn in 20s. Trell, you want to take this one?
Oh, if you're getting destroyed in Incarn, that means a lot of things are going wrong. So, I mean, there are people doing world first keys just about. Like Andy's group, the number 1 group currently, was doing 29s and 30s when I checked on them yesterday. But that's because they have the explosive affix basically solved by their healer. And if that's not the case, and which is not the case normally in pug groups, then it's going to be a very hard week to play. Fortified explosive is hard enough, let alone the other affix. I mean, it's a hard week for pugs. That's a shorter version, and it's not too bad of a week for an organized group.
All right, our next question comes from Undad TV, who asks, does Havoc serve any purpose whatsoever in PvE content if they remove Chaos Brand? This is Undad, who recently made the brave tweet that Demon Hunter it would have been better if they just never made it, and it has done nothing positive for the game since it's been created.
They have like Darkness.
That's true. Darkness has been real for some fights. I don't think current Darkness is really that much of a thing.
Chance of survival. I mean, the only real, for sure, good thing about Darkness is that it makes Spirit Link Totem even better, right? Because it just divvies up less damage taken.
Yeah,
but there's no like guarantee Darkness will make you survive a group-wide mechanic.
Old Darkness used to be a lot better than it is now as well. Like it used to have a really nice interaction with SLT where you would Darkness the initial hit, and you could also Darkness the redistribution if it made your health go down. And so Darkness was like double dipping in SLT. Mm-hmm. Darkness used to stack with other Darknesses favorably, and now it doesn't. So, yeah. I don't know. I think Havoc's fun, though. Playing Momentum in particular is really fun. I recommend people that haven't done that, try it. Give it a try. It's a really fun play style.
Havoc is really fun to play. I like Havoc. It's very chill. Unless you're playing Momentum.
Yeah, 2 very different ways to play that class. And actually quite a lot of different like sub-builds now going into next patch. So kind of exciting on that end. Next question comes from Nevernude, who asks, at Tettles, at Dratnos, are you going to miss saying GameStop Performance Center, home of complexity?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
How many times did you guys say that while you were there? Like,
I've probably
They were
said
a
that
sponsor.
hundreds of times, lifetime. Yeah.
I don't make the rules. They were a sponsor.
That was the, I think somebody like offhand said that was how to say it the first day, and I literally just every single time I said the full name from there.
You could just call it the GameStop Performance Center. No, it's home of
It's
complexity.
the home of that's where it was. So yeah, I don't know. I think complexity is owed a tremendous amount of respect from like Race to World First fans for upping the level of competition and the game in that way, and I'm sad to see them go, but I'm excited to see what Liquid does now. I think that's represents even another step towards big things.
I'm also interested to see what Echo does this next. Like, are they gonna have another live event? Are they gonna go back to remote? Like, I don't really know what's happening with them.
I mean, surely they'll try for a live event, right? I remember watching many times, and they were just talking about the few players that were still remote having such a hard time, like either communicating with them at times because, you know, when you're trying to get up at the same time during the day, you can't just like knock on their door, or they had internet issues across the seas, and that was preventing them from like doing Painsmith. I remember someone on that, the boss, having a really hard time in Liquid. Like, surely they'll want to do a live event again.
I do think getting to be in the same room is valuable because it means that during your food breaks you're able to do strategy, which adds hours to the day, which is valuable. But it's also really valuable to just have everybody on reliable machines, and that was not the case last race, which it seems like an unforced error if you have, you know, Jeff Bezos bucks or whatever, you corporation dollars behind you. So I don't know. I continue to think that Ori should put a very high premium on getting all or like 90+% of their players on at least on a fiber connection of some kind.
Yeah.
All right. Our final question comes from Maniac in chat, who asks, does the seasonal affix open up the MDI to a bunch of new interesting routes or strategies, or will we see something similar to prior seasons where it's pretty much one way being a clear best?
That's a good question. I think there's going to be some really sick things to do with this affix for MDI, especially because like just the movement speed alone you get from the movement speed guy is the same value as Lightfoot and Skystep pots, but on a longer duration. So you can do some pretty crazy grouping of mobs with that kind of thing that you wouldn't have been able to until this season.
Yeah, I'm curious as well how it's going to work out. I suspect it's pretty likely that there will be some pretty dominant strategies that emerge in MDI, but I don't know what they'll be yet.
I don't think this is going to be a finesse season at all. I think that there's some seasons where there's a lot more like especially early on into the expansions, there's like a lot more finesse with the pulls is required because it feels like the mobs just hit the tanks a lot harder, so thus your pulls are smaller and like more coordinated and calculated things are a little bit more important.
Yeah,
with this season, I feel like teams are going to blast the dungeons so fast and just Frost Mage Destro lock it straight into the ground, and it's just all gonna die.
Yeah, tanks are going to be pretty beefy this season, I think. Like we're doing testing on normal raid gear right now, and several tank classes are just unstoppable.
Yeah,
so that's going to be great for MDI.
I think there was a JB tweet about it, but like every tank talks about how sick their character feels on PTR, which is such a great place for the game to be. So,
oh yeah,
it's looking good. I'm excited for next tier. I think it'll be easier to find a tank for keys probably than it was before. Anyways, on that note, we will be back next week with potentially a guest, and we will discuss M+ classes, what's gonna be good potentially in the next patch. Until then, later everybody.
Goodbye.
peace.